action. I can't get no call to action, but I try, and I try, and I try.
Hello and welcome to Call to Action, the go-to podcast for anyone trying to make sense of the world of marketing, advertising and beyond. In an industry that is a minefield of utter bollocks, we aim to capture our heroes and allies from the front line to have a chin wag with. It's like Pokemon Go, with the single but vital exception that it's not a short-term bandwagon of shite. It's brought to you by Gasp and I'm Giles Edwards. Today I've caught Tom Roach. With over 20 years' experience in the industry and a stack of IPA effectiveness awards to boot, Tom is one of the world's most respected strategists. He's worked at some brilliant agencies and acronyms like AMV BBDO, BBH, adam&eveDDB, and Les Binet, creating exceptionally effective campaigns for a whole host of famous brands, McDonald, Sainsbury's, and the BBC, to name just a few. Currently VP of Brand Planning at Jellyfish, he's dead set on championing the commercial value of creativity, which is partly why we like him so much. Tom says the advertising is dead line is probably more commonly deployed by people hyping up the dawn of a new era and new technologies. Welcome to the show, Tom.
Thanks very much, Giles. What an intro, and not without its bollocks and bullshit. But we can't avoid it sometimes, can we?
True. Okay. Right. 7 quick fires. Tom, singing or dancing?
Singing.
Tom Hanks or Tom Hardy?
Tom Hanks.
Oh, correct answer. Burnett or Field?
Or both, but Burnett.
An IPA one here. Logic or Magic?
Oh, you can't choose. But you're going to make me, aren't you?
I am. I'm not moving on.
Oh God, BBH talk about logic and magic, and I don't like to separate them. I really, really don't. You absolutely do need both, but I guess because I'm a strategist, you probably have to put me slightly on the logic side.
Okay. 60-40 or 70-20-10? What a ridiculous question.
I do, or 99-1, which still these. I guess 60-40, but I occasionally do deploy 70-20-10.
Right.
You know.
2 more. TV or TikTok?
You can't make me. TV is currently more established, more proven, but slightly on the slide.
Okay, last one. A Jellyfish one, which is ridiculous. Lion's Mane or Portuguese Man of War?
Portuguese Man of War. Just turned up on the beaches of Cornwall or Wales, I think, somewhere.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, scary.
Nice. I was unsure about that one. I thought just because you work at Jellyfish, I'm not sure if that's part of the initiation, doing some jelly.
It's funny. We have the name is Jellyfish, but we don't use it in our sort of distinctive assets at all. We don't use it as a thing. It's a sort of rule, actually, weirdly, in our kind of brand, our own brand armory. So yeah, interesting.
Interesting, yeah. Well, Tom, thank you for joining us. It's only taken a few years to finally happen.
Yeah, sorry about that. We first spoke, I think, in November 2019. And I think we were talking about doing a joint one with Les and me, which would have been really fun and interesting. But for some reason it fell off the agenda, and now it's back on. So that's great.
Yeah, no problem at all. It's good to talk to you, man. Really, really good to talk to you. So we know you've worked at some legendary agencies, as mentioned in your intro. But before we get into that, can you tell our listeners about your first ever job, and then what was your first kind of marketing strategy type role?
Well, my first actual proper job was tragically in an agency. Although prior to that, I thought I was going to be a singer. So on the singing or dancing question, singing came quite easily. So I was a choral singer. I'd sung in choirs, and I'd been a chorister as a kid, and then a choral scholar in an Oxbridge college. And that and many of my peers went on to be opera singers and went to music college and that kind of thing. But I was taken to one side and told by my singing teacher that I just wasn't good enough. So I did a bit of that for the first sort of 6 or 12 months of professionally after I left university. And I carried on actually, but singing is something I've always done, but it wasn't to be as a career, probably fortunately, because I'd be stuck in the back row of some provincial cathedral choir, probably and I wouldn't be having quite so much fun in my work life, I suspect.
So you can be a choral scholar, but you're still not good enough.
Yeah, well, different kinds. I mean, we could talk forever about it, but there's different kinds of singer, and my voice didn't have the scale and freedom that it needed to fill an opera house. It was rather constrained and, shall we say, English, so suited to a certain kind of music and not others.
And do you still sing now, Tom?
I do a bit. I live in Cambridge, so I occasionally get the odd invitation to sing with a if there's an interesting performance or something going on. So if it looks and if the people sound nice and it sounds like a piece that I'd want to do, I'll do it to Bach B minor mass or something like that. But I find it increasingly difficult to hit the high notes, which is a tenor is excruciating for everybody. So and I also find my voice is getting quieter and quieter, and it's terrible. It shows I'd never had the real technique that you need, because singing is a real physical business. You do it with the whole body and the whole mind. And I think I never quite learned how to do it properly. And that meant I couldn't do it as a real thing.
Well, we spoke to Richard Huntington, because I know he's in a choir, and he I'm trying to avoid saying sings the praises of singing, but
he's been very vocal about it, hasn't he? Sorry, little pun there, but and there's a number of strategists that do it, and I think, I don't know, in our business it's great that people seem to often have another maybe slightly more creative string to their bow, hinterland thing, which I think is often a sign that somebody's got something interesting going on.
Yeah, amazing. And then what was this first job in an agency then?
The first job in an agency. So when my singing teacher said you're not cut out to be a singer, so you need to get a real job, I wrote a whole bunch of letters to a whole bunch of agencies and did all the graduate application forms. Didn't get anything, but got a reply back from a little agency called Court Burkett and Company, who were in Tottenham Court Road, and founded by a guy called Hugh Burkett, who's a sort of legendary character in marketing and advertising. And he gave me some work experience, and I worked there on work experience and got a job. So I was an account exec. It turned into a real job. I was there for like 18 months, and then I moved on to AMV BBDO. But that was was back in 98. And it was a small agency of about 50 people. It still had a media department. And I think possibly that experience, that was in a world where media had mostly split from the creative agency world, but you could still find media in little pockets of creative agencies. And so that was a fun and interesting experience. Worked on some great brands, things like Southern Comfort and Pimm's, and some of those brands that are now Diageo. Bell's Whiskey was one. GNER. What else I work on? Singapore Airlines, Singapore Tourist Board. So some and Peroni actually was one of my first brands. So we brought that to the UK. So really, really interesting little experience. But I quickly realised that I needed to get out of there and into a bigger place, into a bigger pond, really. And so I went to AMV as an account manager, and then switched to strategy. Quite soon after I think the planning director on the account that I was on, which was Mars Confectionery, we didn't have a planner, and the head of planning at the time sort of spotted me and thought that I was probably more suited, which I think is probably true. I'd have been an awful account man, client management person if I'd carried on. I think it was not really my bag.
It's funny how many people move away from that, and how few I've spoken to have moved into that. It seems to be quite a well-trodden path. In fact, even you could probably go back even further, from studying history to smaller, often independent agency, to bigger agency, and then away from account management.
Yeah, I think it's like anything. If you're suited to a certain thing, you should really, really, double down on that. I'm a really big fan of great account people. I think they're often unsung heroes. I think we should make more of them. I think client management, account management is a tremendously important role, but is undervalued. And I've seen in certain agencies, leadership trying to devalue it and trying to turn it into something that it isn't. And I'm a big supporter of it. And I always think that there should be some awards for account people. Best sell. best relationship, these sorts of things that are so important. I have this idea that great account people are snow ploughs. They clear away, they look ahead and they clear away the issues that are coming down the tracks, to help create a brilliant environment in which to make great creative work, great effective creative work. And really great client management people do that effortlessly, and I love it, and I could never do it, but I watch it from afar and admire it.
Yeah, well, that's well said. It's good to know too. So prior to writing all those letters and getting that first gig, did you know then that you wanted to get into the agency world?
Yeah, interesting question. I think that I think since my English GCSE class, I'd sort of, it would be in the back of my mind, and then when I was at the end of my degree and I needed to get a job, it sort of came to the front of my mind. Oh, that's what I'm going to do. And what happened, if I go back, I can remember Gavin Watson, our English GCSE teacher, and he showed us in class a video of what must have been Cannes Award winners or some great award-winning advertising. And on that video was Guardian Points of View, amongst other brilliant things. So actually a John Webster BNP DDB, a classic commercial. And we analysed it amongst these other ads. And I think at that moment, I'd always been into pop culture. And I think at that moment, I realised that this stuff called advertising was, both low culture, pop culture, regular culture, stuff that was just in the culture, but that could be analysed and looked at and thought about. And it uncovered a sort of, I guess, an intellectual world, a sort of logical world of around that particular area of culture that I didn't realise existed. So you could analyse a TV commercial in the same way that you could talk about a poem or a novel. And that I think liberated me to think, this is a world that's quite interesting that you can get into, maybe. And at that point, I hadn't thought about it as a job, but it was only later that I did. And I think, and it obviously is only really in hindsight that I can trace back to that moment, but it definitely was that moment. I was like, this thing called advertising can actually be quite smart, and could be a career, or could be something that you could spend time thinking about and doing. And so, yeah, that particular commercial has quite a big place in my heart, actually, as a it's just a brilliant piece of advertising, super emotional, but incredibly smart and clever at the same time, and done by an agency absolutely the top of its game in, I think, the early 80s.
Although Guinness Surfer remains your favourite, though.
Yeah, I think. Where have I said that? I probably have said that. Yeah, I think it probably. Yeah, it's funny. I think you have to say, it's funny when you look back at Guardian Points of View. It's very clever. It doesn't quite have that scale and impact that I think you some of the really truly big productions that came later, and I guess probably were possible through the kind of CGI and the technological developments that became possible. But yeah, Guinness Surf is amazing. I had the great fortune of working very briefly with Walt Campbell at AMV, and actually met him properly for the first time subsequent to that recently, and had a great chat, and just think he's just a genius and slightly twisted mind. And if you look at his reel, he's got the most incredible reel of work, unbelievable portfolio, a portfolio that when you look at his website, he's got a better reel than most continents have ever produced. If you add it all up, it's unbelievable, and all of it has this just tremendous magic, surrealness, darkness, weirdness, oddness that I think is rare. It was rare then. It's vanishingly rare now to get the kind of the strangeness of creativity that used to be allowed on our screens and seems to not appear so much anymore.
Well, and it's so important, really, isn't it? I mean, as someone who's just said you were interested and a fan of pop culture, ads that kind of transcend into culture, something we talked about with Paul Feldwick, maybe it's one of those things that you just say as you get older, and actually it's not so much true. But I remember talking to Paul Feldwick about his brilliant Barclaycard ads, and as a kid and someone who, to pick up your points of that exposure you had via your English teacher of Adland, to me, I felt really removed from it and didn't really understand it to even be a career option. And yet, at the same time, I was simultaneously falling in love with these silly, wonderful ads with Rowan Atkinson and Boff.
Yeah, I mean, great campaign, and again another BNP DDB classic. I think I think we've left the era when great creative TV advertising was so much of a cultural force. But I don't want to be a kind of nostalgia, rose-tinted person about that. We have many new forms of creativity that we perhaps that are different and are different tools and tactics that we've got these days to get under the skin of and to use. I suspect the era of the truly great TV commercial is probably behind us. But let's not kid ourselves. Amongst the 1% of amazing things that were on our screens even back then, there was some absolute trash.
Yeah, well said. And I don't think the era of truly great advertising is by any means over. So there's
no, of course not. And I mean, I look back and I've got things that I remember in my ads and campaigns that must have had thousands and thousands of TVRs behind them from a local department store. Arding and Hobbs in Clapham Junction used to advertise to me as a 4-year-old or 5-year-old living in Berkshire. That's just mad. It didn't need to do that, and yet it's absolutely lodged in my head as a TV commercial to this day. And they spent way too much doing that. And that was part of, and many other brands that I could mention just didn't need to do that. And now brands like that have many other tools that are more appropriate for the kind of businesses they are. I think that's progress.
There's a few meatier topics that I really want to get into, Tom. And to be honest, it's probably bad planning on my side of things. I haven't necessarily decided, even as I talk now, in which order we're going to go through them. But maybe it would make sense to fast forward to your position now, given you have touched on a lot of these other stellar agencies, and talk about Jellyfish, where you find yourself now, because Jellyfish is, I think, quite proudly different from agencies. You've talked about that, and you've certainly written about that. Can you explain a bit more about what you currently do and how that is different to what you've done historically?
First of all, it's probably worth just saying what Jellyfish is, and then I can talk about what I do there. But so Jellyfish is, and forgive the jargon, but I think it's probably describe it as a kind of new era or new breed of digital first marketing services company. We do all sorts of things. Our history is more in the performance space, PPC, search, SEO. We've developed a significant media business off the back of that. We are increasingly doing creative content of all kinds, and around that we now have brand strategy, media strategy, which kind of completes the picture. So the journey that I've gone from upper funnel, if you want to use the funnel metaphor, agencies to what was probably a lower funnel agency, but that is heading up the funnel. So we've kind of met in the middle. I've come down it, and Jellyfish is heading up it. So I wrote a thing called The Wrong and the Short of It a couple of years ago, and that got circulated at Jellyfish by somebody who subsequently I met and who hired me. And his perspective was, this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to combine the two. And so this theme that I bang on about, and kind of this idea about doing brand and performance at the same time, bothism is what Ritson has called it, is what we are trying to do, and amongst many other things, I have to say. And so brand strategy at Jellyfish is at the heart of that. It's when we have not all of our clients are we doing creative work for, but when we're doing creative content for a client and media, it comes together really well. And we're doing brand thinking and media planning and creative thinking all at the same time in the same meetings, in the same conversations. We're not, we're bringing those things back together in a way that they've been split before. And that's quite an exciting thing, an exciting place to be, because it's been too siloed, too bifurcated, I think. And also there've been other, there's the kind of the lower funnel people, called them performance people, have not necessarily been exposed to some of the kind of brand thinking, some of the work and theory that's done by the likes of Les Binet and Peter Field and Byron Sharp and all those kinds of people. And so bringing that kind of thinking to those kinds of conversations opens up new opportunities and new prospects, and people are incredibly eager to learn about that sort of stuff. And it can put a new sort of, I guess, intellectual theoretical framework across it. And so something like, I wrote a thing about the sales funnel and trying to improve it and modify it in light of some of the sorts of work that people like Byron Sharp have done. And that framework has been adopted by us for our media clients. So we're using that on a regular basis on the work we do for a whole range of clients. We use it in pitches, and it seems to work, which is great, because I wrote it. I'm not a media person really, and I wrote it not really properly understanding a lot of what I was talking about, because I'm not an expert in some of it. But it seems to fit, and it seems to work, and it seems to reflect reflect the kind of instinctive thinking that a lot of our experts at the lower funnel end of things were doing anyway. So it was really encouraging when that piece on the funnel seemed to chime with what our people at the coalface are actually doing here.
We're a fan of your new and improved funnel here, as I think you've been told already by Beth, because we've adopted it with full credit, mostly to articulate the way that historically funnels have been understood. I mean, very rigid and linear. And I must say, just in defence, I suppose, of some of the criticism that the sales funnel I see receive is that I think it's unfair to criticise a metaphor for being a metaphor.
Yeah, and it's just a model, and Ritson, when I wrote that thing, was a bit scathing, because it's like, no, we shouldn't use the sales funnel. We need to have our own bespoke customer journeys and plan our communications campaigns that way, which I also wholeheartedly agree with. It's just the sales funnel is a reality of much of how certainly digital ad inventory is sold and packaged by the platform. So let's use that and let's develop from it, rather than kind of completely chucking it out, because then we're none of us are talking the same language. So at least it's a metaphor around which, or this slightly evolved version of it at least, is a metaphor around which we can all get behind and build from, rather than it just gives you a common framework to start with.
No, exactly that. And it enables good things to then happen and effective work to come from it. It's one of those things. I mean, if you ask anyone to simplify anything so complex, they're going to have to leave certain things out.
Yeah, no framework should be, we should never be slavish to them. There was a phrase we used to use at McDonald's with Les Binet, which was freedom within a framework. That's what you should always be aiming for, I think, with any kind of framework, is some principles and guidelines, but also the freedom to do the right thing, the bespoke thing, the tailored thing for your particular problem or issue that you've got.
Freedom within a framework. I love that.
Alliteration always works.
It does. It really does. Just again, a bit more about the media and creative working together, because it's one of those topics that I have spoken about recently. It came up when I was talking to Rich Kirk, Katie Nair as well. We touched on that, and I think going way back maybe a couple of years, I remember Rory Sutherland talking about it on the pod, how it's one of those things that when they did split in the first place, and we can all point fingers over why that might have been, it seems quite obvious to those within that there were going to be issues. And I was actually looking earlier for some notes from that recording, because as I say, it was over 2 years ago, and I stumbled on something that was shared today. It's a quote that Rory gave recently. Separating media from creative is a little like cutting a Sudoku into 9 separate squares, handing them to different people and asking them to solve it, which is unsurprisingly brilliant. Well,
Rory is the has the best Bond mode, doesn't he? And he's got the best jokes in the industry. By the way, never follow Rory Sutherland on stage if you're ever needing to do that or being asked to do. I did it once and regretted it, and I've just about recovered. Yeah, it's obviously there were, as you said, there were practical reasons or commercial reasons for the split. It's just when you get media and creative and sort of strategy people together in a room, it's just, to me, it's just about human relationships and the great things that can happen when smart people get together and do and try and solve a problem together. If you're in separate rooms doing separate things, briefed separately, separate buildings, separate countries, even with a separate brief from a client where you've all been asked to do something in a slightly different way, and you're doing it in a silo, plainly, that's not going to end as well as it could if you're all talking from the beginning. Sometimes, of course, it can sometimes work that the media plan is a thing that's handed to the creative agency, and they can express themselves within that media plan. And of course, the other way works really, really well sometimes, which is, creative agency has a brilliant idea, and then the media agency build on that and look at how you then express that idea in different places. But I'd much rather those conversations happen simultaneously at the same time, because there's a chance that you can build on things and you can have that flexibility to add things. It's just, and I think particularly in this world today where we've never been, with the platforms that we have, the kind of creativity that needs to happen on those platforms can be so bespoke to the platforms. You think about what a TikTok looks like versus another kind of video. You need to be really native, and you need creative people who are in that platform and who have an understanding of the platform and the media in the platform, the formats in the platform. So I think to divorce the creativity, that let's call it the message, from the medium is nonsense. We know those two things are so connected. We know the best creativity absolutely is kind of indivisible from the medium that it appears in. So to divide up the process and the people completely and silo them, it just is plain wrong. So it's great to be able to do those two things together, or three things even, and we do that as much as we can. It's not always the case at Jellyfish, because sometimes we've got a media account, sometimes it's a creative account. Sometimes we're only doing a bit of it, and so it's not possible to have it in the sort of dream scenario where you're all working together. But my best experiences so far have definitely been where you are working together. And yeah, I couldn't feel better about it. I don't think we've necessarily done something truly amazing yet, that I could hold up and go, this is point to as an example of this is what happens when you do the two things together. But I've seen it and experienced it and had good experiences, which are definitely better than they would have been without the connection.
Yeah, it's that age-old, it's that lovely quote, isn't it, which we used for a few years because we remain media neutral. Of if all you're holding is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. If you've got all of these tools within your agency, or even just knowledge of those tools, and you see it as a collection of intelligent people rather than a collection of people that just do performance.
Completely, and I know now, for having stepped out of the creative agency world that I was in, I can now look back and see that whilst I thought I was doing strategies to come up with really big ideas that could work anywhere, the reality is probably that I was more focused on TV than because that was the nature of the clients that we had and the kind of media that they were using, and definitely we were. I've been for much of my career, I've been focused probably too much on a particular channel, which is TV. And that's why, it's partly why I've gone to this new kind of world where I've got I think a wider variety of channel types, tools to play with. So there's there's a richer set of things to express creativity through, I think.
Yeah, it must be quite a journey for Jellyfish, actually, because I remember years and years ago now, Jellyfish were one of the training providers we used as an agency. I think we sent some of the team up to the Shard to do some Google training and SEO work. So for someone who was so significantly focused on performance and that kind of lower funnel, to then migrate and move up is actually really interesting. And I wonder if there's been, surely there'll be friction within that. Of course, it'd be mad if there wasn't some type of friction. But
of course there will be. I mean, we will, we still have a really huge training business, and it's selling all sorts of training courses in different specialisms. probably more in the sort of the technical end of things, and probably more at the sort of lower funnel end of things. But yeah, are there growing pains? Of course there are, as you're trying to add new different capabilities into the mix, and trying to integrate them into one coherent system. And you need new kinds of philosophies, new kinds of thinking, new tools to try and bond those things together. And I suspect that's why the funnel thing caught on, because it tried to speak across the metaphor of the funnel, which is, that is the one. I think that's why I'm attracted to those sorts of metaphors, because they're models that combine the full picture. And so it's we still have brilliant specialists in all of these different areas, and it's one of the exciting challenges is getting them speaking to each other and learning from each other. And one day I'll be briefing a copywriter who only writes copy for the app stores, and the next it'll be somebody who's just an amazing expert in SEO who's doing all of Nike's SEO. And it's new to me, and I think it's really interesting for everybody. And as a business, we're pretty big now, with 2,500 people, 42 offices. Different offices will have different centers of gravity. Some will be more at the tech end of things and the data end of things. The bigger offices will have a more diverse mix. But I think that cross-fertilization of capabilities is very exciting. You just need to make sure everyone's, it knows the full breadth of what we do, and there's it's one brand, one coherent sort of brand that's integrated. And so if we acquire new businesses, there's a big focus on integrating them really quickly and making sure everybody's one kind of having one cultural experience. But it's very exciting.
Yeah, no, it sounds exciting. And it was nice earlier on you clarified that, good work can happen when departments do operate in silos. But I think I suppose the key thing there is that work can still work despite the disconnect, rather than, because of it. So it's only going to benefit you.
It would make no sense for me to say you can only do it like that, because so many of our clients were doing, one thing or two or three different things. We're not necessarily doing media and creative together yet on. So it's an experiment, and it's something we're all learning from.
I want to, before we get into listener questions, because we do have quite a few to put to you, I want to jump into something you wrote recently about advertising and why advertising will never die. I did quote you in the intro about how that idea, or that the idea that advertising is dying is probably more commonly shared by people hyping up the new eras and new technologies and new tools. And I think you're spot on. But why did you feel like you had to write that piece recently?
Good question. Why did I write that? I think just an annoyance at the endless cliche you see so often repeated, that advertising is dead. I think there'd been a very recent quote from Droga saying that, and it had become a cliche, and it was a sort of frustration with the cliche and wanting to get under the skin of it and understand why we have this sort of self-denying or self-wounding sort of view of what we do. And we've all been part of this kind of conspiracy, sort of slagging off advertising as sort of, which is just dumb, given the fact that some of the very, very biggest, most successful companies in the world are advertising businesses, and this strange disconnect between those two facts. And I think, it was about people coming along, slagging off the old thing, saying I've got a new thing to sell you, when actually that new thing is really just a new kind of advertising, and getting frustrated with that. And I'd much rather people all, we were all, one big happy family going, yeah, isn't this new world exciting? Don't we have this incredible array of new tools available to us? And I know that's not going to be the way anybody sells anything. You've got a new company, you're always going to try and position yourself against the old thing. It's a sort of, a bit of a rant really, but just trying to understand what's going on when you see this stuff, and try and get people to look beyond what this. And so much of what we see and read in the marketing press and beyond is actually just salesmanship. It's people selling you something, it's not necessarily real research or real data or anything that's got any real credibility behind it. I get frustrated when you see articles and you're like, no, that's just somebody selling something. Often what I hold my hand up. I'm often selling something in everything I write, but it's because I'm not an academic. I'm not a researcher. I've not got a ton of real data that I'm sitting on. But yeah, it was a rant really.
Time, weather, and...
We interrupt this podcast to announce that we will never interrupt this podcast with ads. Ads that awkwardly nudge you to contact the pod's host Giles at gasp.agency. Only last week, some pod listing companies did just that, calling for guidance on research and brand positioning. But we're definitely not asking you to do that. Anyway, back to the show.
And finally, brand purpose. Let's talk a little bit about brand purpose. What a load of fucking nonsense brand purpose is, yeah?
Oh, the godfather of marketing, Mark Ritson, telling it like it is. Not what we were after. Hang on. Here we go.
We need to let them out every now and then, don't we? I mean, I do more than most, but I certainly think we should be proud of advertising. I shared. I'm often sharing Jeremy Bullmore's wonderful writings, just because I think it surprises me how few people have even heard of Jeremy, let alone read his wonderful wisdom. But I shared a very short piece, Plonk and Placebo, recently, and it's funny even reading that, and it's certainly a conversation that, again, nodding back to Rory, other people have developed in the last couple of decades even further, and probably widely known for. But that value that is brought through brands is undeniable, and I do think we need to be prouder of that as an industry.
Yeah, I mean, we are surrounded by incredible success stories of huge brands like Google and Nike and Apple, I guess, are the usual types that have made the modern world that's around us, and we should be proud of that. Obviously, brand advertising is probably lesser component of those successes than maybe it might have been in the past, but brand thinking applied across businesses, across channels, across not just communications but all sorts of disciplines is phenomenally powerful and valuable. And we need to be really proud of it and the impact that it can have. And within that, advertising still has a huge role to play. And we shouldn't be, I guess we were slightly guilty of it early in this conversation. We shouldn't be too down on what's changing in the world of advertising. It is very exciting what can be achieved. And do we need to be more creative with some of the new tools we've got available to us? Yeah, of course we do. But some of these things we've got available to us are only a couple of years old. TV took probably 30 years to get any good as an advertising channel. So give us some time, and we will begin to deploy creativity in that incredible way we do in this industry, which is we apply human imagination and creativity at scale to enormous businesses and make them better and different and make them more valuable. And that's something to be celebrated.
Yeah, well said. I'm going to move to listener questions, Tom. So, asking the general public for their opinion, be it on Brexit or boat names or Boris, we are recording today, is notoriously fraught with danger, but that's not stopped us asking. So, we've chosen 3 to put to you. I'm going to start with Jonny McGrath-Smith, who says, I loved Tom's candid piece, I've never heard of Jellyfish, when he first joined. And in this, he mentioned learning about bringing brand and performance closer together. So I would love to hear what that's looked like. So I know we've touched on this, Tom, but maybe like some practicalities of how it's, presented and how that actually works when you're meeting with a client who historically might not have, joined them themselves internally.
Yeah. So a practical example, so we have touched on this, haven't we? But a practical example, working with an aviation startup very recently called Connect Air, who are a US-UK startup. They want to be the Uber or Lyft of flying. So they want to build a business that is an on-demand private flight network using all the local airfields that exist in the States, the thousands of pilots, small planes, not necessarily private jets, in fact, not private jets, so small propeller planes, and be in an app where you can literally decide on demand to fly from one city to another or one region to another. much more cheaply than you would expect to do so. So that's a really interesting startup. They came to us. Brand strategy developed a brand positioning for them and a brand or creative platform, a brand platform that is essentially open the skies was the line. So democratizing the joy of flight was the idea, and we applied that sitting alongside media strategy, media planning. The first application of that idea we applied to some creative work, which was going to be for a WeFunder campaign. So one of their very early first campaigns was going to be trying to raise some money alongside some of their bigger investment conversations that they've been having. And so we made some videos, some Facebook videos and others to try and get people to click through and to raise some money for that business. So brand strategy, creative people, media strat, working very closely, a media person that's probably more used to working on those sorts of performance-driven, direct response types of campaigns, being able to think more broadly than perhaps previously because they were given an idea with real creative legs that was going to be an idea that's going to start building that business, that's going to be present in all of their marketing materials that they've got going and is part of their pitch deck, etc. So a bit of brand thinking applied to a very small performance-led campaign, and that so that's a very practical example. And the clients they talked, I think they felt that this was a new way of doing things. They talked about this is amazing that you've got the left and right brains going on at the same time. You've got the kind of, I guess, more quant side of things and thinking about how you deliver the media on campaigns like that. And the more, is it right brain or left brain? I can never remember which. But the more creative side of things happening at the same time. So simultaneously, same people, same call, same presentation, not separated. So that really is the practical example. So I've just wanged on a bit too much about that.
No, not at all. No, that's really interesting to hear.
It's not, there's no, I don't think there's any great mystery, but it's just opening up those possibilities of cross-fertilization and having the same conversations at the same time and problem solving creatively.
Do you also prefer, and do you see it as a benefit that you then become ultimately responsible rather than there being, other departments? Or
I guess it's a corporate responsibilities. You're all in it together. You're all thinking about it together. You can't just. I think there's a disease that's maybe happened from the more upper funnel end of the world, where in the old days, if you were making one big TV commercial, that was fine. But these days, if you're making lots of things, lots of smaller things, some of the people in those earlier conversations don't ever see the smaller pieces of creativity that are being maybe more fragmented or disappearing onto platforms that those people don't use. And there's a slight invisibility that can happen. I think with that invisibility of seeing the advertising, seeing the output, there's a kind of not seeing the issues or not seeing it firsthand or not kind of troubleshooting in the same way that you can if you're seeing it firsthand. So it being part of those conversations and throughout means that everybody is responsible together, as opposed to that kind of baton passing or kind of Chinese whispers effect, I suppose, where things get watered down, and by the end of it, nobody who started out thinking about it is particularly interested in the output. I think it means that everybody can be interested in the output at the same time.
I remember years and years ago, so probably, I don't know, maybe 20 years ago, prior to us starting Gasp, my brother Andrew, who I've subsequently found out you worked with at Les Binet, said to me about being a small independent that actually there's something really strong from a client conversation to explain that as a small independent, for example, we can't hide behind, say, the McDonald's account, that they could, not that they did, but there is something really powerful about that. So that's something else that maybe is relevant. I don't know. Question 2 then. I've made it clear already that I'm not happy with how this person is introduced, but I'm going to stick to the script. The annoyingly handsome and pod alumni Nick Ellis, in response to Jonny's question that was shared on Twitter, says, also on that point, I remember the piece you wrote well. Arguably, you have nothing to prove anymore. You've already achieved Hall of Fame status. So what drives you to seek new challenges, Tom?
Oh, God, I really haven't achieved whatever Hall of Fame status is. And I don't feel like, I think there's lots of things to do. What drives me, I mean, I want to carry on learning stuff. I want to know how this new world works as well as I thought I knew how the previous era worked. I still love making campaigns. I still want to carry on doing that. Yeah, it's the same things that have always driven me, I suppose. It's just learning about stuff and working on great brands and helping build brands and working with creative people. I mean, this is a business that is so much more fun than some of the things that we could have ended up doing. So, I could have been a lawyer or an accountant or something like that. This is actually fun. So yeah, I just want to carry on working and having fun and learning stuff. It's not, I don't think it's particularly, but I would absolutely deny that in any way I've got a kind of status like that. There's a weird Twitter thing, I suppose, or sort of Twitter, LinkedIn thing, where if you've got a few followers and you've written some things, people assume a level of sort of status, which is very, very strange to me. There are genuine legends in this business, or have been, and I'm not one of them. And I'm lucky to have worked with a couple of them, I think. But I'm certainly not, don't have that status.
So restaurants don't clear spaces and bring tables out of nowhere for you yet?
No, they don't. They don't. And nor should they, nor will they ever.
Nor should they ever. Amazing.
It's advertising, right?
Exactly. Good answer. And then the last listener question, at least, is another Call to Action alumni, Will Humphrey. And he asks, how do you think agencies can get their mojo back in an increasingly short-termism tactical marketplace?
It's difficult, isn't it? So creative agencies in particular, I suppose to some degree the media agencies, that they fear what's coming, and I'm not sure that there's any, and they will. And I've heard in every agency I've ever worked with of those type, there's always this conversation about how we get back to where we were and getting our mojo back, and this year's going to be different. And I'm not sure, I'm not sure that that framing the sense of progress as a way to get something back doesn't feel like the right way to go somehow. I don't know what the answer is. I'm not sure if I agree with the assumptions within it. I think the creative agency world is probably declining a little bit, or at least the bigger companies are shrinking a little bit. But there's some tremendous small independent agencies doing amazing things. And so maybe it's, if you look at it as a category, look at the ones that really are achieving. I mean, if you look at, the much fated Uncommons and Drogers and people like that, they're doing, and Pablo, they're doing amazing things with small number of people. They're changing the way they do things. They're employing different kinds of structures, smaller number of people, maybe more freelancers, and they're able to achieve great things. So I think a sort of nostalgia for 400 or 500 people in a building in Soho or West London or Paddington, I'm not sure is the answer to the question of getting your mojo back. Try doing new things, getting your hands dirty, trying new models has to be the way to do that, doesn't it? I think. I'm sure you're part of that, that sort of world.
What, the Ricky Gervais and Stephen Merchant?
The Reading and Bristol regional thing that you and the guys at Halo have got going on.
Awesome. Nice one. Good answer again, Tom. The final part of the interview then is our 4 pertinent posers that we put to all of our guests. And that starts with, what advice would you give to your younger self?
My younger self, I would tell them that nobody knows anything. So don't be fearful of trying new things. Don't feel like you've got to be an expert before you do anything, because really there are no experts. Nobody knows anything particularly. Yes, of course there's expertise, but don't let that be a hindrance. Because I think, and I still have it to this day, I kind of like to become knowledgeable in a thing before I'll try and do anything in that. And maybe that can be a hindrance. Maybe it slows you down a bit, kind of a reticence or something. And the other thing I say is just avoid cynicism. There's a brilliant thing that they used to say at BBH, to avoid the 3 C's of cynicism, complacency, and what was the other one? Can't remember it. And I think as a planner or a strategist, sometimes you can get a bit negative or cynical, and that's a hindrance to creativity. So always see the upside, see the positive, try and build on things. Don't be negative, because that's a hindrance to creativity. It hampers it.
Yeah, the nobody knows anything reminded me of that. Is it the Dunning-Kruger curve that you see, and you kind of do see it? And I'm probably in a deeper place than I care to admit. But it's one of those things, isn't it, where you see people who believe they then relatively know so much once they've learned something, and actually all it does is expose what you don't know. But it's good advice. Number 2, if you could banish one thing from the industry, what would it be and why?
Probably bullshit. You talked about it in your intro. I think there's an awful lot of hot air that's spoken. I don't think it does us any favors. I think it makes us look a bit stupid. I think we like to use jargon and bullshit to kind of protect ourselves from looking out of touch, and to make ourselves look smart and modern. And I think mostly at a very senior level, at least in companies, plain speaking, simple concepts, commonalities across disciplines are more powerful than the divisions and silos that using jargon can cause. So maybe let's remove bullshit.
Nice. Yeah, well said. Wouldn't be much left though, Tom.
Really sorry. And I'm also know that I'm as guilty as the next person of using it and using jargon, but sometimes you just have to.
Yeah. Well, bullshit is relative, isn't it? I think if you're in a room with people using acronyms, then you sometimes have to follow suit, don't you?
There's, of course, there is a difference between jargon and bullshit, but there's way too much of both, and particularly bullshit.
Yeah, and there's big overlaps, surely. Number 3, are there any books you would recommend? And I'm going to add, why haven't you written one yet?
The book, there's sort of standard list, isn't there, of advertising and marketing books that you're really supposed to read, and I could say them all. The one that I particularly love is Paul Felbick's Anatomy of Humbug. It's a sort of love letter to the industry and to the history of the industry. I'm a historian by degree, so I love the history side of that book, and the way that it goes through the different. I particularly love the way that it exposes that some of the language and concepts that we use as being 100 years old, or the proposition, or whatever the USP, different ideas and concepts that we use, and exposes them as really as something that a particular person at a particular time used or invented to sell their agency. And it's a good reminder that a lot of the concepts we use are they were just salesmanship at the time. And it also is a great reminder that there is many, many ways that advertising communication can work, and it can do many different things. And I think it's I'm probably guilty of this sometimes, thinking that things can only work in one way. And I think it's a really important lesson that there are many, many ways. And the best marketing, advertising strategy people, I think, come up with their own philosophies about how things work, combining different ways and different kinds of thinking, rather than being too monotheistic. Let's be polytheistic about how we think things work, because then we'll get to more bespoke solutions to the problems that our brands and clients have.
Excellent. Well, as we record this, our previous episode, which was released last week with Alex Morell, Anatomy of Humbug was the one book he would save if he had to choose one. Alex is a very well-read man, but it's a wonderful book. Are there any non-industry related books? Are you a non-industry reader?
I'm terrible. I'm a terrible collector of books and buyer of books, and then not a non-reader of them. So that's just an awful question to ask. My 11-year-old has just chomped through Animal Farm and To Kill a Mockingbird and Of Mice and Men, and it was a real great pride.
11-year-old, wow,
yeah.
That's wonderful.
And so it's made me think I really need to get back on it. There was a second part to your previous question that I may not have answered. What was it?
Why you haven't written a book?
Why I haven't written a book. People ask, and I have this great fear of writing the required apparently 80,000 words. So it's currently a kind of big Everest to climb. My the pace of my writing, people think I'm prolific. I'm actually not that prolific. I write about 2,000 words every other month, and they are very highly wrought, and they take, each word takes me a lot of time and effort, and I find it quite hard. So the idea of it currently is too big. Somebody came to me asking for some ideas for books, and I've got a couple of thoughts. And yeah, it's about finding the time to really do it. Alongside the day job, it's a tricky thing to do. So I also have a doubt about whether I've got anything truly original to say. A lot of the things that I've written are sort of summarizations of other people's thinking and trying to expose and create accessible other bigger work, more important work. People like Burnett Field and Byron Sharp and that kind of thing. And so I tend to be a writer of shorter things, trying to take and democratize in our small world some of the key concepts that those kinds of thinkers have come up with. So the notion that I could come up with my own thing that's kind of worthy of a book, I'm not so sure about. But it's, you can hear the kind of, I guess, a bit of imposter syndrome about me thinking I'm not really a writer of books. I'm a writer of blogs and articles and posts and tweets. So we'll see. We'll see about that.
Okay. You can always Dave Trot them all together.
Yeah, I'm not. I could do a book of my blog posts, but I'm not sure that the publisher would want me to do that.
Fair point. Brilliant. Number 4 then, Tom, is we always dedicate every episode to someone, and we bestow or hospital pass that honour, depending on your view, to our guest. Would you kindly do the honours?
I sort of nominate, I'll do it in honour of Les Binet, who I know is one of the big names in our industry, and he probably gets used an awful lot as a sort of thinker, and as a his work gets used all the time. I don't think and I was lucky enough to work with him when I was at Adam and Eve. I don't think there's an individual, maybe alongside Peter Field, I don't think there's an individual that has had a greater contribution to proving, kind of without doubt, the commercial impact of what we do as an industry. His and Peter's contribution to analysing this thing called the IPA data bank, and all of their successive publications are phenomenally important to the industry, not only in the UK but globally. Not only has his work been phenomenally important to that, and isn't yet done in terms of the greater impact that it could have beyond the UK and into other markets. It's just a thoroughly brilliant human being, a wonderful person, and I was just really so lucky to get to work with him. So yeah, Les, this is for you.
Amazing. This is very proudly dedicated to Les Binet. I remember tweeting something years ago to Les, and it was along the lines of wishing we could keep him in a cage in the studio like a wise owl, to which he replied he'd happily work for free for infinite supply of cuttlefish.
He's just a wonderful human being. Just look at his Twitter bio. He calls himself a spreadsheet jockey, pint-sized spreadsheet jockey. This is a person that's has a huge impact on our industry, but is incredibly just normal and humble and funny and sweet and nice, and loves music and dancing and doing silly stuff.
Although I'm worried, I'm currently stuck in a little Twitter chat with him and Andrew Wilshire about my father-in-law, who keeps an Excel spreadsheet of what's in the freezer. And sadly, both Les and Andrew seem to think that's a good idea.
Yeah. Les is a big believer in collecting longitudinal data sets. Has tremendous amounts of personal data on himself. He lives and breathes his belief in the long term and the importance of collecting data,
Right.
Which clearly you're becoming aware of.
That's brilliant. I'm going to link, so a final call to action for everyone listening. If you head over to this episode, there'll be links there to everything discussed. So Anatomy of Humbug. I'm going to link to lots of the articles. I couldn't find, I know this is going back in time, but I couldn't find numbers every marketer should know on your site. I mean, it's available in a plethora of places and all sorts of SlideShare decks, so we can link to that. But do let me know if that's on your site.
On my blog, I think I gave it a different I think the article may have a different headline or title, so it may be called "Most Marketing is Bad," because it ignores the most basic data, I think.
Good stuff. We'll link to all of those, but how else can our listeners get more Tom Roach?
I guess the blog is thetomroach.com. I write sporadically, and probably I need to write more frequently for Marketing Week. My articles on Marketing Week subsequently always end up on the blog. I'm a bit on Twitter at Tom Roach, and I'm a bit on LinkedIn. I prefer Twitter to LinkedIn because it's just funnier and more fun and a bit spikier. But if I have to be on LinkedIn, I post the same stuff on LinkedIn that I posted on Twitter. And, message me, call me up for a conversation. It's amazing, this kind of new world that we've got where, and I think COVID has sort of done this, where I've had amazing conversations with people who just messaged me and have led to interesting things. So yeah, very happy to get a message from somebody and have a chat.
Brilliant. Well, Tom, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure and a privilege to talk to you. It's
been a fun conversation. Thank you very much, Giles. It's been great to be on.
And finally, thank you to everybody listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do share and review the pod. Keep the questions and guest requests coming in. To get in touch, it's easy to find Gasp online. You can check out CTA Pod on Instagram or email hello@calltoaction.co.
I can't get no call to action. I can't get no call to action, but I try, and I try, and I try, and I try.